The air hummed with the strange mechanical rhythm, a sound unlike anything Horst Meyer had heard in his 23 years of life. Standing rigid among the crowd of German prisoners, still wearing the remnants of his Wehrmacht uniform, he peered through the small window in the camp laundry facility. Inside, a large metal drum spun with hypnotic consistency, water churning in violent circles, dissolving dirt and grime from hundreds of garments at once. The American guards watched with casual indifference as the German prisoners stared transfixed at the automatic washing machine, a contraption so foreign, so utterly alien to men who had grown up washing clothes by hand in cold rivers or in metal tubs heated painfully over wood fires. For these soldiers who had marched across Europe with Hitler's armies, who had been told of American weakness and technological inferiority, the sight of water and soap swirling with mechanical precision was more disorienting than artillery fire. How could an enemy supposedly on the brink of collapse waste such resources on something as mundane as washing clothes? Horst felt a tap on his shoulder as Carl Schmidt, once a proud panzer commander in North Africa, leaned close to whisper, "Is this how they clean everything, with machines instead of human labor?" Before Horst could answer, the American sergeant motioned the prisoners forward, his voice carrying none of the harshness they had expected from captors. "You'll all be issued clean uniforms. Your old ones go in these baskets for washing." The translator repeated the instructions in German, his words echoing across the concrete floor of the processing center. Camp Clinton, Mississippi, 1943, a place where defeated Axis soldiers would discover that the America they had been taught to despise operated by rules they could scarcely comprehend. As the mechanical churning continued in the background, Horst couldn't help but wonder. If the Americans had machines just to clean dirty clothes, what other marvels might they possess that Germany had never glimpsed? The journey into captivity had prepared none of them for this moment. When their transport ship had docked at Newport News, Virginia, after weeks crossing the Atlantic, most prisoners had steeled themselves for execution or torture. Nazi propaganda had painted vivid pictures of American savagery. Tales of soldiers returned from battle with fingernails removed, of prisoners starved until they resembled walking skeletons. Some of the younger men had contemplated suicide rather than face what surely awaited them in American hands. Even the veterans, men who had fought across Sicily and North Africa, kept their faces carefully blank, hiding the fear that gnawed at their insides. The first surprise came at disembarkation. Instead of clubs or rifle butts, they were met with orderly processing, fingerprinting, photographs, medical examinations conducted with brisk efficiency. American military police directed them with hand signals and simple German phrases, but there were no beatings, no casual cruelty. Each man received a card with his prisoner number, camp assignment, and a list of regulations printed in both English and German. They stood bewildered on American soil, still waiting for the brutality to begin, unable to process the calm procedure unfolding around them. The train journey inland revealed a landscape untouched by bombing. No craters scarred the earth, no blackened ruins of buildings stood as monuments to destruction. Instead, towns passed by their windows intact, farms operated at full capacity, and civilians went about their business with no visible signs of wartime hardship. Horst had grown up with air raid sirens as lullabies, watching his mother darn the same socks a dozen times because new ones were impossible to find. Here, storefront windows displayed goods that had disappeared from German shops years ago. Leather shoes, multiple styles of shirts, even toys for children. Major Werner Hoffmann, who had once lectured his men on the inherent superiority of German industry, sat silently by the window, his fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against his knee. "Perhaps," he muttered to no one in particular, "this is just what they want us to see. A Potkin village built to deceive us." But as mile after mile of abundance rolled past, his words carried less conviction. Even the most dedicated Nazi among them fell silent, confronted with evidence that defied everything they had been told. At Camp Clinton, they were divided into barracks, each man assigned a real bed with a mattress, sheets, and a wool blanket. The concrete floors were swept clean, windows allowed fresh air to circulate, and overhead lights glowed with steady electricity, luxuries that many German soldiers have forgotten during the desperate final years of the war. But it was the laundry facility that truly captured their attention. The automated washing machines that seemed to embody a fundamentally different approach to human labor and comfort. For men raised in a society where laundry meant hours of scrubbing by hand, where soap had become a luxury reserved for special occasions, the sight of these machines processing hundreds of garments without human effort represented something more profound than mere technology. It suggested a nation with resources so abundant that even the most basic tasks could be mechanized, freeing human hands for other work. What kind of enemy, they wondered, could afford such extravagance even for their prisoners? The answer would come gradually, in revelations that would strip away certainties layer by layer, leaving the prisoners to confront a reality far removed from the vision of America they had carried across the Atlantic. And for Horst Meyer, watching the hypnotic spin of the washing machines, the first cracks in his worldview were already beginning to form, hairline fractures that would soon spread in ways he could not yet imagine. The morning routine at Camp Clinton began at 6, with American guards walking between barracks, their calls for Aufstehen, get up, delivered in accented but understandable German. Prisoners filed out for roll call, standing in neat rows while names were checked against rosters. It was during these morning formations that many first noticed another peculiarity. The guards themselves wore freshly laundered uniforms daily, the creases sharp, the fabric free of the stains and wear that had been commonplace among German officers even in the early war years. After breakfast, portions that seemed extravagant to men accustomed to the dwindling rations of the Reich, prisoners were assigned to work details. Some were sent to the camp's maintenance facilities, others to agricultural labor on nearby farms. Horst found himself assigned to the laundry detail, a placement that both fascinated and unsettled him. Working alongside the machines that had so captivated him upon arrival, he began to understand their mechanics. The motor-driven agitators, the automatic timers, the drainage systems that removed dirty water and replaced it with clean without human intervention. "In my village," whispered Hans Brandt, a former infantryman from Bavaria, "my mother spent every Monday washing clothes for 8 children. Her hands were raw by evening, bleeding sometimes in winter. These machines do more in 30 minutes than she could in a day." His voice carried a mixture of awe and something close to shame, as though the efficiency of American technology somehow diminished the heroic labor of German womanhood. The American sergeant overseeing the laundry facility, a middle-aged man named Thompson, seemed to take pride in explaining the operations through a translator. "Bendix automatic washers," he declared, patting one of the machines. "My wife just got one at home last year. Before that, we had a Ringer model that still needed some handwork." He demonstrated how the cycle selector worked, the dial clicking through different stages of washing and rinsing, all without human monitoring. When one of the prisoners asked why machines were needed for such a simple task, Thompson looked genuinely puzzled. Why would anyone waste hours doing by hand what a machine can do better? That's time you could spend with your family or working on something that matters. The concept seemed so obvious to him, yet to the German prisoners, it represented a fundamentally different philosophy of labor and value. In the barracks that night, discussions erupted over what they had witnessed. "They're soft," insisted Oberfeldwebel Rudolf Keller, a hardened veteran of the Eastern Front. "This reliance on machines makes them weak. German hands have calluses from honest work. That's real strength." But others were not so certain. Horst found himself thinking of his mother's perpetually chapped hands, of his sister spending precious daylight hours scrubbing linens when they could have been studying or creating something of value. "If their machines free their women from laundry duty," argued Carl Schmitt, "doesn't that mean more Americans available for other work? More factory production? More research? More of everything?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its implications. If America could mass-produce washing machines even during wartime, what did that suggest about their manufacturing capacity for tanks, planes, and ammunition? A small book circulated among the prisoners that week, a Western novel one of the men had received from the camp's modest library. It wasn't the story that drew attention, but rather the publication date, 1943. A new book, printed on quality paper with a color cover, published in the midst of a global war when German civilians were lucky to find newspapers printed on rough brown sheets. Such a small detail, yet it gnawed at their certainty, raising questions about which nation was truly struggling under wartime conditions. The next laundry day brought another revelation. As fresh uniforms were distributed, Horst noticed they were not merely clean, but meticulously pressed, with creases so sharp they might have been drawn with rulers. In a corner of the facility stood another machine, an electric mangle used for pressing flat items like sheets and trousers. A single operator fed damp laundry through heated rollers, producing in minutes what would have taken hours with hand irons heated on stoves. "My wife would consider this heaven," murmured Hans, watching the sheets emerge perfectly smooth. "She heats 3 irons on rotation to keep one always hot enough to work with." The American guard nearby overheard the translation and chuckled. "My mother switched to an electric iron years ago. Said she'd never go back to those heavy stove-heated monsters." He said it casually, without any intention to boast, which somehow made the statement more devastating. Electric irons, automatic washers, mechanized presses. These weren't luxuries for the American elite, but ordinary household items. So common, they warranted no special mention. As Horst folded the warm, crisp sheets destined for the guard quarters, he found himself wondering how deep the contrast went. The washing machines had been his first glimpse into a different world, but each day brought new discoveries that suggested America operated on principles entirely foreign to those he had been taught. And beneath the surface of these revelations lurked an even more troubling question. What did it mean for Germany if everything they believed about American weakness had been not just wrong, but catastrophically, comprehensively false? 3 weeks into his captivity, Horst was transferred to a new work detail, assisting in the camp's commissary where prisoners could purchase small luxuries with credit earned through labor. The shelves stocked items that had become distant memories in wartime Germany: razor blades, writing paper, chocolate bars, and cigarettes. Not imitations or ersatz versions, but the real products, available in quantities that suggested no shortages, no rationing, no desperate conservation of resources. "Look at this," Private Heinrich Muller whispered, holding up a package of Gillette razor blades. "The metal is so thin, so precise. In Berlin, men are shaving with the same blade for months, resharpening until it tears the skin." He turned the package over in his hands, as if it might dissolve, a mirage rather than a tangible object. The camp's supply sergeant, a heavy-set man named Miller, took inventory with methodical patience, checking items off a clipboard. Through the translator, he explained that each prisoner received a basic allotment of toiletries: soap, toothpaste, a toothbrush, regardless of work credits. Additional items could be purchased from personal accounts established through the International Red Cross or earned through camp labor. "Back home," Miller mentioned offhandedly, "my local drugstore carries maybe 20 different kinds of soap. Here, we just get the standard military issue, but it's good quality." The casualness of his statement hit the German prisoners like a physical blow. 20 varieties of soap, available to civilians in the midst of a global war, when German families were hoarding tiny scraps of grayish bars that barely lathered. Horst helped stock the shelves with fresh cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes, remembering how in his final months fighting in Italy, a single cigarette had been worth more than a day's rations. Here they were counted by the pack, by the carton, distributed with the same matter-of-fact efficiency as everything else in the American system. In the dining hall that evening, the conversation turned once again to the confounding abundance they witnessed daily. "It cannot be real," insisted Werner Hoffmann, the former major who had clung most desperately to his pre-captivity beliefs. "They are showing us only what they want us to see. Behind this facade, their civilians must be starving, their factories struggling." Across the table, Medical Officer Johannes Weber shook his head slowly. He had been working in the camp's infirmary, assisting American doctors with routine examinations of fellow prisoners. "I've seen the supply shipments," he said quietly. "Medicines that we ran out of years ago. Antibiotics in quantities our hospitals would consider miraculous. And these aren't reserved for Americans. They use them on us, on prisoners they have no obligation to save." "Yesterday," added Carl Schmidt, "I saw them throw away food, actual food that was merely left over. Not collected for reuse, not saved for another meal, but discarded as if it had no value." His voice trembled slightly with the heretical thought forming in his mind. What if everything we were told was a lie? What if America is not crumbling, but thriving, even while fighting a two-front war? The silence that followed was heavy with implication. For men raised in the rigid ideological framework of the Third Reich, questioning one aspect of official truth meant the entire structure might collapse. If America was not weak, but formidably strong, if their industry was not failing, but producing at unimaginable scale, what else might they have been wrong about? Later that night, Horst lay awake on his bunk, listening to the sound of rain on the barracks roof. Tomorrow was laundry day again. The washing machines would churn with their hypnotic rhythm, transforming soiled fabric into clean, bright cloth with a mechanical efficiency that still seemed miraculous. Such a simple thing. Clean clothes, yet it had become the lens through which he was beginning to see a different world, one where human effort was multiplied by technology rather than consumed by endless manual labor. In the darkness, he allowed himself to wonder about the home he had left behind, about his mother and sisters still washing clothes by hand in cold water, their fingers cracked and bleeding in winter. He wondered what they would think of these machines that performed in minutes what took them hours of backbreaking labor. And beneath that thought lurked a more disturbing question. If America could spare such miraculous devices, even for prisoners of war, what chance had Germany ever had against such a nation? The truth revealed itself not in grand moments, but in daily details. Electricity that never faltered, running water that remained hot for hundreds of showers, roads without bomb craters, trains that ran on precise schedules. For the prisoners of Camp Clinton, it was as if they had crossed not just an ocean, but the boundary between different stages of civilization, from a world of scarcity to one of abundance so complete it appeared careless. Summer brought sweltering Mississippi heat that reminded the Mediterranean veterans of North Africa. The Americans responded with another technological marvel: electric fans distributed throughout the barracks, mess halls, and work areas. Not just for the guards, but for prisoners as well. The metal blades spinning steadily, circulating air in a facility where German officers would have considered open windows sufficient luxury. "When the electricity fails, what then?" asked Rudolf Keller, eyeing the fans suspiciously. The American guard nearby looked confused at the translation. "Fail? Why would it fail?" he responded, genuinely puzzled. "Maybe during a big storm, but then the emergency generators kick in." The concept of reliable electrical service, of backup systems ensuring continuous power, struck the prisoners as extravagant beyond reason. In Germany's final war years, blackouts had become so common that people planned their lives around the absence of electricity rather than its presence. The laundry facility continued to fascinate those assigned there. Beyond the washing machines, they discovered additional wonders. Giant tumble dryers that eliminated the need for clotheslines, electric water heaters that maintained constant temperatures, and most impressively, a complex system for recycling soap and water to minimize waste. An American engineer explained proudly that the system had been designed specifically for military applications, allowing for maximum efficiency in field conditions. "We can process uniforms for 500 men in a single day," he boasted through the translator. "Used to take dozens of workers days to do the same volume." The prisoners exchanged glances, mental calculations running behind their eyes. 500 uniforms daily in one camp facility. How many such facilities existed across America? How many across the vast network of military bases worldwide? On a particularly hot afternoon, Horst and several others were assigned to unload a supply truck bringing fresh linens to the camp. Not rough army blankets, but actual sheets made of cotton so fine it felt alien to fingers accustomed to wartime fabrics. The American quartermasters supervising the delivery checked items off a manifest with casual efficiency. "Cotton from Mississippi plantations," he remarked, patting a stack of folded sheets. "Processed in Georgia mills, assembled in North Carolina factories." All within a few hundred miles of each other. The geographic concentration of production, the seamless supply chain moving raw materials to finished goods with minimal transportation, it spoke of an industrial organization that Germany, with its bombed railroads and fragmented manufacturing, could no longer match. That evening in the barracks, Medical Officer Weber shared a discovery from his work in the infirmary. "The Americans have washing machines just for medical linens," he said, his voice low with wonder. "Separate from regular laundry, with special detergents and higher temperature settings to kill bacteria. One machine can sterilize enough bandages and sheets for an entire field hospital." The implications hung in the air. In the desperate final months on the Eastern Front, German field hospitals had reused bandages, washing blood-stained gauze by hand because fresh supplies couldn't reach the front. Infections had claimed more lives than Russian bullets in some sectors. Meanwhile, American military medicine operated with an abundance that ensured cleanliness as a baseline expectation, not a luxury. "My brother lost his leg to gangrene last year," Hans Brandt said quietly. "The hospital had no clean dressings, no antibiotics. The wound festered for weeks before they amputated." He looked around at the spotless barracks, the freshly laundered uniforms they all wore. Perhaps he would still be whole if he had been lucky enough to be captured instead. The words bordered on treason to Reich ideology, yet no one contradicted him. The evidence surrounded them, impossible to deny or explain away. Some prisoners still maintained rigid postures and distant expressions, clinging to their training and beliefs. Others began to ask questions, tentatively at first, then with growing curiosity about the world that had defeated them so comprehensively. As autumn approached, bringing relief from the summer heat, the prisoners settled into routines that would have been unimaginable months earlier. Weekly laundry service, regular showers with hot water, meals that, while simple, arrived with reliable consistency 3 times daily. The washing machines continued their rhythmic cycles, but they had become background noise rather than objects of fascination. Familiarity had not diminished their significance, but rather deepened it, transforming them from curious devices into symbols of a systemic difference between nations. What began as disbelief had evolved into something more complex, a reluctant reassessment of everything they had been taught about America, about Germany, about the nature of national strength. And as the evidence accumulated in daily revelations, even the most dedicated Nazi sympathizers found their certainties eroding beneath the steady assault of observable reality. Captain Dieter Vogel had maintained his rigid adherence to Reich principles longer than most, refusing to acknowledge the implications of what they witnessed daily. A career officer from a Prussian military family, he had lectured younger prisoners on maintaining dignity and distance from their captors, on remembering their oaths to the Führer. Yet even he fell silent the day he witnessed an American maintenance crew replacing a perfectly functional washing machine because a newer model had become available. "Such waste," he murmured, watching the old machine being loaded onto a truck. The American sergeant supervising the exchange overheard the translation and shrugged. "This one's going to another camp," he explained, "and the new one uses 30% less water and electricity, pays for itself in under a year." The calculation was purely practical, devoid of ideology or sentiment. Resources were valuable, but not scarce. Efficiency mattered not because of desperate shortages, but because it made logical sense. Vogel said nothing more, but that night he sat alone on his bunk, staring at the wall for hours. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding. Not a dramatic conversion, but the quiet acknowledgement that the world operated differently than he had been led to believe. The next morning, he joined a discussion about American manufacturing for the first time, listening rather than dismissing. For Horst Meyer, working now in the camp commissary, the transformation was more complete. He found himself studying American systems with genuine curiosity. How supply chains functioned, how machines reduced labor, how the seemingly casual abundance around him rested on foundations of complex organization and vast resources. He began keeping a small notebook, jotting observations about processes that might be useful knowledge in a future he increasingly struggled to imagine. "What will we tell them when we go home?" Carl Schmidt asked one evening as a group sat in the recreation area, some playing chess with carved wooden pieces provided by the YMCA. About the washing machines, the electric fans, the abundance of everything? Who would believe us? Medical Officer Weber removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully on his shirt. Perhaps the better question is, what will we do with this knowledge? If America builds washing machines with the same factories that produce tanks and planes, what does that mean for Germany's future? Do we continue believing in our superiority while our women wash clothes by hand? The questions found no easy answers, but they marked a profound shift. Men who had arrived as dedicated soldiers of the Reich were beginning to think as individuals again, evaluating evidence with their own eyes rather than through the lens of propaganda. Not all reached the same conclusions. Some retreated further into rigid ideology as a defense against cognitive dissonance, but the conversations themselves would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. In October, a small delegation from the International Red Cross visited the camp, interviewing prisoners about their treatment and conditions. The Swiss representative seemed unsurprised by the reports of adequate food, medical care, and facilities. What caught his attention was a comment from Hans Brandt about the laundry systems. "You find the washing machines noteworthy?" he asked, seeming puzzled by the emphasis. "In Germany," Hans explained hesitantly, "such technology exists only in commercial operations, not for ordinary use. Here, they are everywhere, even in a prisoner camp." The Red Cross official nodded, making a brief note. "Yes, I understand. America has embraced domestic mechanization to an extent unusual in Europe. When you return home, you may find such innovations spreading eastward. Progress tends to flow that way eventually." The casual prophecy lingered in Horst's thoughts long after the delegation departed. Return home? To what? A Germany in ruins, its cities bombed, its economy shattered. Would washing machines and electric fans seem like trivial concerns against such devastation? Or would they represent exactly the kind of practical progress needed to rebuild? As winter approached, the camp received new prisoners transferred from other facilities, men captured later in the war who brought stories of Germany's deteriorating situation. The narratives confirmed what many had suspected. The Reich was collapsing under the combined weight of Allied bombing, Soviet advances, and internal shortages. Cities that had once been industrial powerhouses lay in ruins. Civilians subsisted on rations that barely prevented starvation. Factories operated intermittently due to fuel and raw material shortages. Against this grim backdrop, the steady hum of the camp's washing machines took on new significance. They were no longer merely curious devices, but embodiments of a different path, one where technology served human needs rather than ideological goals, where efficiency aimed at comfort as much as military power. The contrast could not have been starker or more painful to contemplate. One cold December morning, Horst found himself working alongside an American mechanic, repairing one of the washing machines. The man methodically disassembled the motor, explaining each step through the translator with a craftsman's pride. When Horst asked how he had learned such skills, the mechanic grinned. "High school shop class, then 2 years at a technical college before the war. Most homes will have these machines after the war ends. There's good money in knowing how to fix them." The casual reference to universal ownership, to a future where such devices would be commonplace, struck Horst with unexpected force. Not as a luxury for the elite, not as a commercial operation, but as standard equipment in ordinary homes. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Today I glimpsed the world that defeated us. Not just armies or weapons or resources, though these were formidable. What truly conquered us was a vision of life where machines serve people rather than the reverse.
where abundance is assumed rather than scarcity, where efficiency creates comfort instead of merely more production. Germany believed in strength through sacrifice. America built strength through innovation. The washing machines that seemed so miraculous upon arrival now appear as signposts pointing toward a future I never imagined possible. As 1944 drew to a close, news of the war's progression reached the camp through official channels and rumored whispers. The prisoners processed the information through their transformed understanding, many now recognizing the inevitability of Germany's defeat against a nation that could manufacture Liberty ships in days and still have capacity for washing machines and electric fans. When victory in Europe finally came in May 1945, the announcement brought complicated emotions to Camp Clinton. Relief that the killing had stopped mingled with concern for families back home, pride complicated by the recognition of how completely their nation had been overcome. Some prisoners celebrated quietly, acknowledging what many had come to believe, that Germany's defeat might ultimately prove its salvation, clearing the path for a different kind of future. In the months that followed, as repatriation processes began, the men found themselves facing a new anxiety, returning to a devastated homeland with knowledge that would seem fantastical to those who had not witnessed it. How could they explain America's casual abundance to people standing in rubble? How could washing machines matter to a population struggling for basic shelter and food? Yet for Horst Meyer, preparing to return to Stuttgart, the laundry facility had become more than a curiosity. It represented a vision worth carrying home. Not merely the machines themselves, but what they symbolized. The principle that technology should free human hands from drudgery, that efficiency could serve comfort rather than merely production, that abundance rather than scarcity might form the foundation of a rebuilt society. "When I return," he told Carl Schmitt as they packed their meager belongings, "I will tell my mother that I have seen a world where women don't destroy their hands washing clothes, where machines do the work so humans can do something better. Perhaps she will not believe me now, but someday she will see for herself." Schmitt nodded slowly. "We came here believing we knew the future, that it belonged to Germany, to strength through will and sacrifice. Now I wonder if the future looks more like these washing machines, practical, efficient, serving human needs without grand speeches or demands for blood." As the former prisoners boarded transport ships that would carry them back across the Atlantic, they carried with them not just memories, but transformed perspectives. The automatic washing machines of Camp Clinton had been their first glimpse into a different world, one that had defeated them not through brutality, but through capacity so vast it could afford to treat even enemies with standardized decency. Years later, when American washing machines began appearing in German department stores during the economic recovery of the 1950s, Horst Meyer, by then working for an import company in Frankfurt, would stand in front of the displays and remember his first sight of those machines in Mississippi. They were no longer miraculous to him, but he never forgot what they had revealed. That nations, like people, might be judged not by their capacity for sacrifice and suffering, but by their ability to transform human labor into something that served life rather than consumed it. Perhaps there lies a lesson for us all in these quiet moments of history, in the astonished eyes of prisoners witnessing ordinary technology, in the cultural shock that reveals more than weapons ever could about why nations rise or fall. For it is often not the grand battles, but the humble washing machines that truly show us who we are, what we value, and what future we are building with each turn of the mechanical cycle.